There are few things in life that I enjoy more than what I'm involved in right now, and that is the collection of another four-wheel drive. I have here a list of all the four-wheel drives I've owned, and it is disturbing. This is my 10th Landcruiser. I've now owned more Landcruisers than all of the other vehicles that I've owned combined. That's an addiction. Let's go through the list very, very quickly. Range Rover, Land Rover 110, Range Rover. Now the second Range Rover collection was a good story because it was the first big one. I travelled up to Johannesburg and drove it down. I remember parking it next to a windmill and getting a whole lot of shots of a windmill. And that was the first time I bought a vehicle long drive immediately after buying it. And I remember it clearly. I remember the excitement. I had a G-Wagon, Discovery. My first Land Cruiser was 79. I picked it up after it had been converted into a double cab. But I don't even remember the collection of that vehicle very well. I remember the videos I shot and everything, but it doesn't fill me with a warm fuzzy. Neither does the 4.5 105. Absolutely brilliant. Fuel consumption ridiculous. And then a NATO spec 290 GD. Fell in love with that immediately, but couldn't keep it because it was registered in Lesotho. So I went back to Land Cruiser and a 76 wagon, which I never fell in love with. So I decided to go back to a 105, but with the diesel motor, and learnt for myself that the 105 could actually be an outstanding four-wheel drive station wagon. My Troopy 4.2, that was the first troop carrier I ever owned, and that was in South Africa. Don't remember the delivery. And then of course the Troopy V8 in Australia. 5 months ago it looked like this. The good part about it is it's driving brilliantly, and the Dream Tourer was a very involved delivery story.
Tell me what you're thinking.
I'm thinking that this is now very exciting. With a chassis extension that had to be done before being collected at my dealership. Now the 105 that we bought in Africa in 2009 to win was an epic story. That was the best collection story ever. I bought it in a place called Mossel Bay, drove it to Cape Town. We worked on it for about 10 days, I seem to remember, and then I drove it up to Johannesburg and did those epic shows, and probably one of the, arguably the most successful series I've ever actually done. In terms of pure viewer numbers, I think it's probably better than anything I've ever done. And then, of course, following not far behind that was the Range Rover that I collected in Melbourne. I flew from here, my home in Perth, to Melbourne, collected the vehicle, did 3 days of work on it, and drove it right across Australia. But that was a 46-year-old vehicle, and that was, to me, that was one of the absolute highlights of my life. And then, of course, the vehicle behind me, which is my second V8 troop carrier, and now another troop carrier, that makes it 5 Land Rovers, 2 Mercedes G-Wagons, and 10 Land Cruisers. Right, aren't I lucky? Now, this trip's also going to be an epic one because we collected in Pretoria. I'll check it out, do a bit of work, hopefully not too much work on it, and then we're going to drive it down to Cape Town, the scenic route. We are going to take a road down here, that's a main road, and then come off the main road at a place called Frankfurt, and then we want to end up at a place called Clarence. Now, Clarence is kind of a holiday town. We are very familiar with Clarence. Gwyn's parents lived there for over a decade. Then we are going to take, now this area here is what's known as the Eastern Free State. Lesotho is a landlocked country and is actually the country in the world with the lowest point. I know it very well indeed, but we're going to stick to roads in South Africa. And the idea is to plan down here from Fixburg, and this area here, the Eastern Free State, is absolutely beautiful. One of my favorite places in all of South Africa. And this is pretty remote here. Wepener, Smithfield, Bethune. It's mainly sheep farming land, beautiful country, and then we're going to go to Hurriep Dam. South Africa is very familiar to me, and there are very few roads actually in the country that I have not driven. But I believe that the road that I'm going to be doing this time might actually be a road that I've never traveled before. And that is from Venterstad down to Steynsburg, Hofmeer, Craddock. Our aim is to end up at the Addo Elephant Park. Here, I've never been to Addo Elephant Park. Then, from there, we're heading west with the idea that we're going to end up in Knysna. Gwyn has family in Knysna, but Knysna's very, very pretty. Shoot some content of some of the prettiest parts of South Africa. It's not an off-road trip because the vehicle we're driving has been not prepared in any way at all for camping, so we won't be camping, but we're going to be staying in small towns, small villages, B&Bs, and you'll find that this kind of travel is very inexpensive for the international traveler. And of course the goal is Cape Town. This is very beautiful. This is extraordinarily beautiful. This area here, Hout Bay. So we're also going to spend some time doing some touristy stuff around Cape Town. Like all trips, I'm going to document it. But the vehicle has no equipment in it at all. For example, I have to keep my camera batteries charged all the time. And the only way I can do that I know of, is there is a cigarette lighter. But what happens if a cigarette lighter isn't working? So I'm taking with me some bits and pieces to make up some cables so that I can fairly easily rig up the vehicle so that I can charge my batteries. And I'll show you how I'm going to do that now. With the Range Rover crossing, I actually took over a Klarman battery box and had Antron sent me over a battery, and so I had power. But in the Range Rover I had a fridge. Well, my current requirements are much lower, just as important. That is a USB charger for my main camera batteries. That is for my monitor that sits on top of my camera, and so that is that's 12 volts. So I need to be able to plug that in there. That comes from 12 volts there. That's my USB. That also fits in there, so that cable will be able to do two jobs. I have made up this also. This was used on my Crossing Australia and the Range Rover and on the Canning stock, and I think actually several trips before that. Basically it's a homemade battery box with a power outlet that can fit that like that, and I have a USB, double USB there as well, and I have wired this up at this time with a Anderson. So if I run a cable, so I'm thinking about this cable here, if I run this cable from the battery, fuse it through the firewall and put a Anderson on the end of it, I just run it through and plug it in, and then all I have to do is attach this to the battery. So I'll take something that I can easily attach to here with crimps, simple crimps that I can attach to the battery. Maybe I'll use that fuse, I'm not sure. So that is what I'm working on right now. I have a couple of boxes here that I'm putting in kit for the South Africa build. For example, these are the Rockloom lights that I had on this troop carrier. They will be going to Africa because with the 1HZ motor, it's very important to keep that radiator clear of spot laps. You know, it's cooling efficiency is not particularly good, so big spotlights tend to generate very high underbonnet temperatures, especially if you turbocharge that engine. And so these nice compact and high performance spot lamps will come with me. I've got I've got a surplus of these very nice lights by Heller for the exterior. I'm going to keep the build simple. I'm going to use this with a shunt. This is the little Victron monitor. I'm not doing anything flamboyant with the Africa build. I want to keep it simple. I've got a few other little things like a battery switch. Now the vehicle is going to be parked for a long period of time, so I'm going to put a heavy duty battery switch so I can disconnect the battery, and a few other little bits and pieces like some day running lights. Again, they're surplus. So I'm taking the surplus stuff that I've got, but the bulk of the vehicle is going to be South African. As you are watching this video, Gun and I are in South Africa driving the troop carrier down to Cape Town. If you would like to see where we are at this very moment, no matter when you watch the video, assuming we haven't arrived, you can go onto our live tracking page and you can see with hourly updates our precise live location. Follow along and see how we are getting along.